welcome everybody. Wonderful to see some familiar faces and wonderful to see some new faces here. This is the 9th webinar in a sequence of webinars around the book that Jack and I wrote, Rebuild the Economy, Leadership and You, which is very much a DIY guide to how we can build a world, an economy that works for all. And at the heart of that, which we've touched on in some of the previous webinars, is a holistic or a whole way of structuring companies and running companies that really ensures that the needs of all of the capitals are taken into account, that the company operates on the most efficient way possible, and that one of the biggest capitals of the company, human capital, is truly on an equal footing to financial capital and is being multiplied at the same time as financial capital is multiplied. And that any company that touches natural capital is also multiplying that. So it's a DIY guide for how do you build ecosystems of regenerative companies that together actually come together as an economic model rather than each company having an individual business model. So it's really trying to take what we're currently doing and ramp it up to the next stage. And Killu and I have had some wonderful conversations about this. And after looking through her presentation about a month ago, I guess, Killu, I thought that it would be very interesting for us to get into a dialogue with everybody else here involved and explore the synergies, the connections, and the differences between Killu's take on that question versus our take. So with no further ado, I will hand over to Killu in just one sentence time. And the intermediate sentence before I hand over to Killu is that Killu will speak relatively briefly, and then we'll move into breakout groups and discuss these questions, which I will put up again before we move into the breakout groups. And if you can't read these questions, set your video settings to either pin me so that I'm the big screen, and then you can read them, or speak of use that whoever's talking occupies the big screen. I do these things a little bit weatherman style and have a green background, and my text is part of this. So these are going to be the themes when we break out into the discussion group, along with anything else that emerges. And so with no further ado, Killu, I will hand the stage over to you, and you have screen sharing permission.
That's great. And first of all, thank you, Graham, so much for the invitation. It's always fun to be at your events and to speak with you. And this talk, as Graham mentioned, came about when I sent him my presentation because I referenced his work. I think it's great work, talking about the fair share commons and how to rebuild the economy in a way that it works for everyone. And I did that at the tail end of a presentation to a startup conference, and specifically on an investor day track. And so some of the slides here are focused a little bit more, on the soul searching of investors, if you will, but really as we're looking at innovating in the world and building an economy and building ways that work for everyone, those questions can apply a little bit more broadly as well. And I think that's one of the reasons we're here to discuss. And then hopefully Graham will also share his very interesting take on risk that and other aspects that come out of his very brilliant and in many ways holistic work that I think could make a huge difference, certainly in my fields of endeavor and in the world. So I'll start screen sharing, and let's go here. Now, let me know if you can see it.
That seems to be working perfectly.
Okay, and thank you. And so I have a disclaimer as well, and the disclaimer is just that this is just one perspective. Obviously, we have people here from different continents, different places, time zones. This is a perspective from California. And, you know, I feel justified bringing that perspective since my job is an innovation funder based in California, but I feel entirely unjustified to make any other claims based on anything else. So we're living in 2021, and I want to kind of bring us into this consideration of whether we live in two worlds or more worlds, or do we live as if we live in two worlds versus one united, interconnected, intergenerative existence. That also seems to be true, perhaps even more so. And then invite some questions to start a discussion. So obviously this is 2021, a strange year. We have a pandemic, don't need to say more about that. And this is a sampling of news from just August, 2 weeks in August in the US and sort of with a Western US focus. So first of all, we had the first ever water cuts for Colorado River Basin that supplies water and power for more than 40 million people. And Arizona actually takes an 18% haircut of the apportionment of the water. That's how bad it is. We've had a drought that keeps getting worse. New England faced its first direct hurricane landfall in 30 years. It didn't do a huge amount of damage, but it did hit the land. So that's where we are. The August 24 news I thought was very telling, the map telling the story of two Americas, one parched and one soaked. On the left side, we see the brown, more dry area. The right side is more wet than usual. And last, this is already old news as far as the news cycle goes, but people are still recovering from a rather serious Hurricane Ida that hit the southeast of U.S. and, you know, particularly in the New Orleans and other areas around there. And so this kind of brings to mind the story of two Americas. It's as if we live in two worlds. Two of them are shown here on the right, but obviously there are many other types. And we are isolating ourselves in this different two worlds. And without reading what's there, that's the external view. And not only that, maybe we have also the separation in the inner and outer world. Who am I inside and who am I outside? You know, I'm a mother and I'm also an employee, and those worlds they only partially overlap. And in our culture, they're not even meant to overlap. Am I a meditator? Am I a deal maker? Can I bring one into the other, or do I have no basis for doing so in the current culture? You know, seeker scientist, efficient, rational boss, or heartful, compassionate friend, and so on. And so this kind of begs the question of how do we see ourselves in the world, and what are the worlds that we're in? So I'm also in the world of finance and innovation, and you cannot help but notice that there's a big party going on in the U.S. funding markets. On the one hand, there's a drought, and you know, California's burning, and many people are suffering. There's a pandemic, but it's also true that NASDAQ in just August hit 15,000. Standard & Poor's 500 index closed at a record high. And by the way, it took NASDAQ 136 sessions. That's not very many days to climb from 14,000 to 15,000. So this is the trajectory we've been on. Today, there's a bit of a rout in the markets, but you know, they come, they go. This is now news from July 16, so it's already old. Just imagine the numbers being bigger, but the content is still the same. Venture capital funding is extraordinary. A lot of companies getting funded, a lot of dollars, billions of dollars, many unicorns. And every industry and investment side is seeing those dollars, including both late stage deals and early stage deals. And it's, I mean, I see it every day at my desk looking at what's happening in the world of funding innovation. US equity markets are, of course, booming also with initial public offerings where you take these private venture funded companies that are the general innovation creators in the worlds of science and technology based innovation, and when you take them to the public markets to then become world, you know, traded equity markets. Then it's important to talk about what's happening in the US because 45% of the publicly traded equity in the world is on the US markets, two US markets, New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ. So whatever happens in the US impacts everybody as far as the capital markets are concerned. And of course, I'm not even talking about, you know, dollars value as as a currency that folks shift to from different countries when there's uncertainty, which is part of the reason for this party in the markets. The number of IPOs is up compared to the news in July. The amount of money is up, but it's basically just a message that it's a lot. And so it begs a few more questions. So what comes after these unicorn herds? If all these companies that are worth so much today, is it really different this time? And how to relate to this? If everything's worth 10 times more today than yesterday, the same company would have been less valuable than today. Does it mean that money is now worth less? Are the pitchforks coming yet? It seems that inequities and inequalities are only going up in the society. And in the investor world, is anyone paying attention to the climate emergency? Of course, we hear about much more funding going to environmental sustainability focused funds, but it's a fraction of the conversations and fraction of activity. And so talking about innovation, I'm just wondering whether we should actually innovate, how we innovate, and what we innovate. And if we don't, will what we do and how we do it become irrelevant soon? Because if we keep going how we're going, it's going to get us what we have. Maybe the question is also how soon? I don't know the answer to that. So what is our biggest issue? Is it that we don't have enough innovation? Or we don't have enough good ideas and solutions, inventions, new technologies, not enough capital? Sitting in my seat, we're swimming in innovation and ideas and new technology, and right now we're even swimming in capital. Or is the biggest issue that we're now somehow finding ourselves in a place that we're doing what doesn't work? And we're doing it based on what we know isn't aligned with our own and society's best interest, even as we may mean well, but we find ourselves here. And I think Graham's and Jack's thoughts on rebuilding the economy in a way that works for everyone is certainly useful and helpful to get us to places where we can do what we do well in a way that works for more of us. And then this begs other questions. What's harder? Is it harder to come up with a vaccine for a global pandemic in record time, which we did? And I'm kind of an expert in the field, having funded a lot of life science companies, including vaccine developers. I did not think it could be done in a year. I thought that was absolutely not going to happen. And it happened. It was extraordinary. Or is it harder to get it in people's arms? And wherever you are on the vaccine conversation, the question is the same, the technology versus people. What's harder? Is it harder to create extraordinarily complex technological and scientific solutions for getting people to listen, to reason, and act from this embodied knowing of our interdependence, rather than the isolation in the siloed world? Is it harder to create more advanced and complex financial instruments and funding schemes, or getting people to get along and trust each other and work together? And what about teaching young minds the facts based on what we think is true or believe is true, or to teach them to actually use their heads and hearts well and to have good judgment? And in general, is it harder to come up with complex solutions based on complex technologies that we've become ever better at, or admitting that actually those types of solutions and technologies may now not be the answer that's needed, and they won't make a difference if we don't solve the right problem? It's a bit of a big elephant in the room. And at the same time, I, of course, come from the basis of arguing that business is the most powerful force to shift society's path of the external forces that we can talk about. And if we think about just personally, last 10 years, last 20 years, what has changed your life? What has changed the most in your life? It's probably based on some aspect of how technology entered society. And that happened not when it was invented, not when it was in research, but it happened when it became commercially available to the masses. That includes us, through the power of business, which got it to us. And so I really think business has a very valuable role to play, obviously, because it can dynamically shift what's possible. And so rebuilding economies using the power of business in the external world side, I think is a conversation well worth having in how can we do it better. obviously there are many other areas, education, government, nonprofit, arts, healthcare, law, social services, and so on, that work to create a better future, but none of them have the power to shift society as fast as business can. And nature and military also act fast, but they tend to stop things, not start things, as far as shifts in society and the kinds of which we're hoping for. So then some general questions are, what can we do and how can we do that? What can we as innovators, entrepreneurs, and investors do? And how to do it and what's worth doing? And it'd be nice if we knew how much time we really have, because that determines what's viable. And then I'll just go briefly at sort of soul-searching innovation funders. We know that we believe that we're uniquely good at spotting good solutions that are scalable, practicalizable, of potential high impact and leverage, building teams to execute well and fast with courage and vision, taking quick decisions, pivoting, learning and shifting in real time, thinking differently, recognizing when others do it and when it makes work, and having great networks of influence, capital, and multiple high capacity. And particularly the first point of spotting scalable, practicalizable solutions with potential high impact and leverage is done by evaluating risk. And I think that's an interesting conversation to have, whether we're as good as we think as we are around that or not. I believe the rest holds pretty well. And then what are we not good at? Well, first of all, we're not very good at humility and acknowledging that there's a lot we don't know and acting accordingly, or listening to worlds beyond research and technology, growth, profits, and current MO, aligning with the heart alongside the head and valuing that aspect of our being, and getting over the implicit assumptions that efficiency, productivity, returns, and growth trump all else, because living in that world, that's what we are trained to seek and know. And we're not culturally very good at humility, generosity, inclusion, considering opposing views, and perhaps even kindness. And so it begs the questions of what else? What other questions should we ask and answer? Who should we include in these conversations to help us do what we do better and in ways that are helpful to all? And what can we do now from where we're at? So perhaps we get to innovate how we think of business we and this whole notion of separation, going from separate to interconnected, because one of those is true, and we cannot change that the world is as interconnected as it is. So we might as well pick the one that is true. We get to innovate how we think of economy and even economic models, and going from local to global, of how we work together, how we don't work together, how to do it better, and all these people-focused topics, and how we relate to each other as separate or as interdependent, as mentioned. How we relate also to our environments, natural environments and made environments, and how we include and account for what we don't know and what we can't manage well. Now, I still believe that there's a lot of value there to be built. The basis of business is creating value, and businesses are built on creating and recognizing that value. New kinds of value can be created from these new economic and business models. That's kind of obvious. And some types of new value perhaps cannot even be built in the current adversarial paradigm, where business, environmental, and social interests are seen as at odds, and they can be built in the new paradigm. So there will still be first mover advantage and low-hanging fruit and value to innovation. And also large new markets are about to be created that were previously hidden or blocked as we enter these shifts. So the more we can see the new emerging, the better we are also positioned on the side of business and entrepreneurship and finance, and those aspects that correspond to the archetype of merchant that is many thousands of years old. The better we're positioned to create and harvest new value. And maybe this time we'll get to do it for everyone. So I want to thank you for your attention, and I'll stop screen sharing.
Wonderful. Thank you, Killu.
Over to you, Graham.
Thank you. So in a moment, we will switch to the breakout groups. And the key question to consider is, what would you do differently tomorrow with your time and money if it's true that we cannot do what does work with today's building blocks, and if we've got the role of fortune wrong? And that is, those two elements are a big theme of our book Rebuild. So of course, we are convinced, based on some interesting research that we've done that economics and business schools significantly underestimate the impact and consequences of misfortune, leading us to make a huge number of strategic errors in how we operate businesses, in particular in how we invest in portfolios. And that leads to misinterpretation, misattribution. Many businesses that ought to have succeeded end up failing because of misfortune. And we misattribute that to systemic cause and effect. And a deep element of that very much at the heart of it, and this may be useful to everybody in the discussion, we found it very powerful to look at how we build business, how we invest in business through these 6 lenses or 6 strata. Stratum 4 is how we incorporate. And at the moment, we take a whole lot of things for granted about how we incorporate that. We've done it that way for 100 years, so that's the way it has to be done. How we actually structure and operate organizations, there's a lot of innovation starting to emerge there. How we interact with each other, how we interact with ourselves, all of the different voices in my head jabbering away at me saying, yes, you can, no, you can't, do it, no, don't do it. All of those 4 strata, we find very helpful to look through those 4 strata to understand what's happening in local business ecosystems, circular economies, citywide economies, etc. And those interact to give us our global ecosystem. And the thought is, if we want to change our global ecosystem, we may well have to do differently on all 5 ecosystems below that. That there is nothing that will fix the global economy that is only acting in 1 or 2 of these strata here. So that's the lens I would encourage you to adopt and look at it. Right, everybody ready to go into breakout groups? Let us now, as a plenary, take 15 minutes to cross-connect across all of us. I suggest that we hear at least once from one person in each of the breakout groups that had 4 or 5 people in them first, and then open up into an open free-for-all conversation. And I propose that we go roughly in order of starting with somebody from one of the groups that is usually the last person to speak in a meeting, rather than the first. Let's start with the last person to usually speak and end with the first person to usually speak.
I didn't really speak in the last one, and I normally am the last person to speak in a group, being a massive introvert. And I've got to be honest, we didn't actually get around to talking about we were so busy talking about the weather because we're British and we just, so.
Any thoughts that are worth sharing from what you did in your group? For example, maybe you've come up with something we could do that would completely transform the weather, which scaled up would tackle climate change.
Patrick Martel, I can't see him on the screen, but he's got an interesting thing. He's looking for ideas about changing something, changing the way he does business, and how important it is. I think he said they used 500 billion gallons, whatever, in water, and just changing 1% would have a massive effect in the mining industry that he's involved in.
Yes,
he's widespread. He's 97% in Canada of all the mining there, and Mexico and America and stuff like that. Very, very impactful, just making a 1% improvement.
Indeed. Thank you. Who would like to go next from another group?
Sure. Your sound dropped for a second.
Yes.
Yeah, so, we were just talking about, actually, it was a great conversation. We talked a lot about focus and oneness and unique oneness. And I think the conclusion that we came to is that to change the world, right, it's a big undertaking, just like boiling the ocean is a big undertaking. The thing is, if we just focus on inner work, right, and healing ourselves first, because once we heal ourselves, we know who we are and why we're here. And then so when we heal, then we have an impact on the people around us. And also the idea that we are all unique, but we are still one. So when we heal and we come together, this is where we can co-create and change the world together, because changing the world does not mean it's on one person, right? But it's about coming together and coming together with people who resonate. So going back to doing things that we can do is really about focusing on our inner journey, right? The things that are within our realm. And then when we take that time to reflect, then we remember why we're here and the greater purpose that we're here meant to do to help the world. And yeah, the idea also of think about the universe, right? We're talking about words, for instance, uni, universe, right? Uni means one, we are one. So universe means one verse. It's almost like we all are vibrating the same. And how do we get to that point? We need to start from all of us and come together and think in this kind of collective community, which resonates the same. Then we can, channel our energy and help the world in the way that Killu explained. And also one thing that resonated with me with Killu's presentation is looking at the polarity of things, right? Because when we don't look at the polarity of the opposites, we don't realize something could be different, right? Because we just literally live our lives like, oh, everything's fine, right? Unless we see the opposite of both sides, we realize, there's something that I can change for myself and things that we can help change in the world. So anyway, so those were some of the conversations we had in our group. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you, Lisa. Excellent. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you.
Right. Who would like to go next? Martin, you've already been. So somebody else from another group who hasn't yet been.
I can go next.
Great. Go for it.
Okay. My group, three of us are in California and one is in the Netherlands. And we were talking about, how do we get and stop focusing on these short-term goals that, the corporate funding situation creates the market. If we could go back to, having the people, having community as a major focus, but that would require, totally systemic changes. So then we talked a little bit about, what can we do on that individual level, which is, be aware of the trade-offs that we individually can make for value for the intangibles, get out of our heads and into our hearts and offer intangible values to the extent that we can. And almost all of us can do that in some way or another within whatever situation we're working. And Franz is working on helping the ice not melt. So that's one really good intangible that I would have liked to have heard more about, but.
Excellent. Thank you, Susan. Who would like to go next?
So I'm happy to share something, even though Lisa was part of my group as well as Kelly, and we had a wonderful discussion. Thank you for the opportunity. It's such a pleasure to be with like-minded spirit, and it's straightened this, inner work that Lisa was talking about. To the answer, what can I do, or how do I behave, knowing that what worked today no longer works, or the fact that we got the role of fortune wrong, is actually to disrupt two of my core beliefs, which are conditioned belief more than chosen belief. The first one is this idea that we live in a world of scarcity. I truly believe that this is a false idea, that the world, we are in a world of abundance. And unfortunately, until we really shift, we will have behaviors of being competitive and extracting resources and using people. So that really prevents the shift that individual and businesses needs to embrace this, killing the idea of scarcity. That's one. And then the other one, belief that I'm trying to disrupt in my own behavior, in my own feeling, and in my own thought, is this idea of separation, which takes the form of polarity in the US, although it could be also an identity crisis, but still this idea of separation, which also leads to, again, competitive behavior and fear. And so these are the two things that I'm trying to challenge on a daily basis, and trying to feel my way into something else. And when I work, I'm trying to be in the being more than the doing. And as Lisa said, it's an inner journey that is not easy, and being part of a group like this is really an amazing way to be reminded to step back and be inspired also to continue. Because the same way that when you're in a candy store and you've decided not to eat any candy, at some point you'll be tempted. And that's really how I feel, being in an economy driven by scarcity with, egotistic processes and conditioning. It's hard to not fall back into this pattern and keep focusing on building something new. So that's what I want to share.
Thank you, Virginie. Who would like to go next? Eric.
Thank you, Graham, and nice to be with all y'all. Killu, wonderful to see you, Kelly, all the Gabby. I think that I'm participating in this wonderful think tank populated by the appearances of it. My camera isn't necessarily great. A wildly sort of mostly middle-aged population here, and that we are struggling with an excess of reasonableness, and that this excess of reasonableness has us approaching the sort of doomsday scenario with a great sort of composure of just go within and be healing ourselves. And I am a huge fan of healing self. But I suspect that if we sort of persist on this kind of self-healing as the only way to go, we will then be perfectly content as Rome burns down, right? So there's perhaps a need to enroll some of our less reasonable younger students in the colleges that ferment revolution, because every revolution has been guided by the elders but populated by the youngers, right? Because those of us who are in our middle journey of life have, for the most part, more to lose than to gain. And so we are incredibly reasonable. And at some point, reasonableness is fucking us up. And so I'm just going to propose that it's time to be a little bit unreasonable, and maybe we are not the ones to do it, but how do we enroll the less reasonable brothers and sisters who will take up arms against the machine and push it so that it falls off of its perch of this perennial production of pain? So I don't have a great answer, but I am greatly agitated, and we're so reasonable.
I can't resist picking up on what you've just said, Eric, and wholeheartedly concur. And that's one of the quotes that starts one of the chapters in the book. I forget which chapter it is, but that it really is time for us to be radical. And the only thing I would suggest is there's nothing stopping us from being radical. And I have met some really, really radical grandparents. You only have to look at people, back home in South Africa, for example. Mandela did not stop being radical when he was released from prison. So I think that you're absolutely spot on. We do have an excess of reasonableness. It's time to, in some senses, get unreasonable, with the caveat that it's unreasonable that leads to something that works better, rather than unreasonable that breaks everything down and leads to nothing that works at all. And that's the juggling act. Right.
You're advocating, if I may, for a very reasonable form of unreasonableness. So there's an inherent bias in that. So anyway, yes, thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Eric. Right. We have, let's say, time for one more person to say something. Martin has his hand in the air. He has already spoken. Does somebody want to desperately? Kelly, sorry, Martin, but I think it's good to go around the room.
I'll be really short. I just wanted to clarify, because everything that Eric just said resonates as usual. Shocking, I know. When we were talking about the inner work, I love the conversation that Graham and Lisa and I were having, and going a little further about it's not just doing the inner work for the sake of oneself, because to Eric's point, if we get stuck there, that's problematic. But I think the analogy I'd come up with was the idea of a symphony, and recognizing that we're so unique. If the flute's playing the flute part and the bass is playing that, and the cymbals and the oboe and all of that, and we're really leaning into doing our own inner work, finding our own purpose, and it's just really beautiful. But doing it as a collective whole for the sake of the collective whole, where when it all comes together in this symphony, in this one beautiful song, it's diverse, it's unique, and it's one all at the same time. And so just wanted to tug on that thread a little bit further.
Excellent. Right, Martin, given that you usually close what is being spoken or don't speak at all, would you be willing to take 1 minute, and then I'll put a few thoughts in?
Yeah, going on, building on Eric's idea, I teach 3 core skills for leadership, which is trying to make it really simple. It's people, life cycles, and discovery. We don't need a revolution, we need an evolution. If we have a revolution, and Paulo Freire's thing kicks in, which is where the persecuted overcome the persecutors to become the new persecutors. What we do need to do is, as Buckminster Fuller said, is don't try to fight the existing reality, create a new one that makes the old one obsolete. And I think that's where we need to go through. I'm totally revolutionary, radical, and all the rest of it, because I've never lived your life. I was ran away from a dysfunctional childhood. I've been homeless 4 times, never been able to break into the system. When I know a lot of violence in my life, joining special forces and all the rest of it. So I kind of see things from the outside, and I've curtailed the anger from my childhood traumatic time and put it into something like this, where I try and motivate and try to prove to other people that they can change, make a change. I've written 1 book. The next book's going to be Rebel Evolutionaries. I used to be a rebel without a clue, and I'm a rebel with a cause, because when I was in the military, I came out and did a degree in environmental studies and realized that we're fighting the wrong battles, the wrong wars. There's 20 years in, Afghanistan's just shown us 800,000 people dead. No one's accepting responsibility, apart from perhaps one military, American military guy who got sacked and lost all his pensions as a result. So yeah, I think we need to evolve. And I think there's a difference between innovation and creativity. Innovating on what we've got now is what we tend to do. There's loads of new tech, but new ideas are very rare. I think we need creativity, which is to actually, do something, as you say, radical.
Yes, wonderful. Thank you, Martin. A couple of thoughts from me as we run into the final 10 minutes of the formal part, and then we can all meet up in the bar afterwards. One of the questions or themes that often emerges in any space where massive systems change is required centers around who's to blame, who should we punish, who needs to be fixed. And one of the big lessons that I learned growing up in South Africa and watching the transition out of apartheid is that in so many cases, it's the system that's to blame. Everybody is embedded inside a system that has certain rules of how to engage. And almost everybody ends up playing the game in the best way that they can. And quite often that ends up, when it's time for change, that people who are driving for the change end up in opposition, opposing the current players. And there's a brilliant quote from Ursula Le Guin that to oppose something is to maintain it. And I really think that this is one of the issues that we are facing at the moment. Many of the attempts from people who've recognized that there's something fundamentally wrong, that we can't do what works with what we have today, is still too much within the current paradigm opposing something. And so, you know, our approach and what Jack and I have described in the book is very much intended, much like South Africa's transition. How can we invent a completely new game that functions differently? Let's shift from this either for-profit or non-profit into something that integrates both. And what we found very helpful, and I'm just going to switch, I'll come to you, Killu. Killu, do you want to say something now or right? Okay, I'm going to switch, whoops, to screen sharing. So you can see my screen? I assume so. This was one of my big design themes, developing the approach that we have today. How can we make the impossible normal? And in particular, how can we get out of this compromise between return and impact, for example, into a place that has high real return and high impact? And I'll just show you a sneak preview of two graphs. This is what most portfolios look like today. You know, one or two companies really succeed. That keeps the average performance of the portfolio rising. But most of the companies, if you wait long enough, collapse, get shut down, go bankrupt. And so we're wasting a huge amount of investment money. Companies run out of runway to pivot before they've found the business model that succeeds. Limited partners are losing money. And most importantly, we're losing a huge amount of the potential power we could have to keep the ice frozen in the Arctic, to do all of the things we need to do to regenerate. Imagine if by doing something differently, we could have this instead of this, where all of the companies that are good, that deserve to live, that deserve to thrive, actually do well. And a central thesis in what we're saying in the book is that this scarcity-driven collapse of so many startups is actually because of how we build businesses rather than a real thing. And if we build businesses differently, we can get that, which unleashes a huge amount of financial capital, human capital, everything to do things fundamentally differently in ways that work for all, that takes care of our environment, our society, humanity. And if I go back now to where I am, at the heart of what we're saying And by the way, you might want to have me on speaker view now or pin me or whatever so that my screen is big. Many of the attempts that have been done up until now are operating only one or two of these strata. They're absolutely necessary. There's nothing wrong with them. It's just that they're not complemented with the appropriate complementary activities in the other strata. And so, yes, there's absolutely a place for inner healing, stratum 1. There's absolutely a place for different ways of interacting with each other as human beings at work, stratum 2. Both of those we cover with our adaptive way. We need more effective, efficient ways of running organizations, things like holacracy, sociocracy, agile. We need that. And we need it integrated with the human dimension. What's missing from a lot of attempts is also the fourth dimension, the systems and interactions between capitals and stakeholders. And just as you could not build a democratic South Africa on a political basis where you could only engage in governance if you were lucky enough to be born with a white skin, we maintain that we cannot build a regenerative, stakeholder, circular, whatever economy if we incorporate companies on the basis that you're only allowed to engage in corporate governance if you're lucky enough to have money to invest, and your voting power depends on how much money you've invested. You know, nation states learned that that was an ineffective way of governing nation states a few centuries ago, that giving voting rights on the basis of, are you a man, are you a landowner, and how much land do you own, doesn't work well. And that, so our thesis is if we do all of these four well, we can really build local ecosystems that thrive, economic models rather than business models. We can get what we saw in the second of the two graphs I showed you, that companies that are fundamentally healthy really thrive because they're not overexposed, oversensitive to misfortune. And that can give us a global economy that is truly capable of unleashing the speed and the transformation we need to address climate change. So that's a little bit about, you know, our take on how to do that. And the big things that we would love to have is lots of people knowing what we're doing. First of all, so that if what we're doing is not working properly, not working as well as it could, that we can find that out quickly and get to what will work better, faster. Secondly, that if what we're doing is powerful, that as many people as possible who could benefit from it actually get to know about it and benefit from it. And you know, what some of you already know is we have a startup factory that we're busy growing to build startups that do all of these things, that follow the recipe of the book. And we're in the process of looking for collaborators, co-founding investors and so on to build an investment fund that will put money into doing this, building these kinds of companies. So that gives you a bit of a input on what we're up to. And for those of you who want to, please do follow Jack and myself on Twitter and LinkedIn. By the way, Jack does very much apologize for not being able to join us. He had a teaching commitment at his university come up, and so he needed to miss this. Do sign up for our mailing list. Next month, 26th of October, we'll have as guest speaker Terry Sexton, who will be talking about his new book, Consciousness Beyond Consumerism, which touches on many of the themes that emerged here. Tell your friends to read the book, watch the previous webinars on YouTube. And if you're interested in understanding the theory behind what we're talking about, take our foundation course coming up in the first week of November. If you want to know more about the Fair Shares Commons, let me know. We will be running an incorporation workshop towards the end of the year or early next year. And if you know anybody who is mid-career and really is passionate about making the world a better place and is toying with the idea of leaving the standard corporate world and getting into the startup world, this is one of our prime prospects for our startup factory. mid-career folk who have solid business experience behind them, who are passionate about making the world a better place, passionate about fully expressing who they are, for them to join our startup factory. So anybody you know like that, please do send them our way. We're on 30:30, so I will hand over to Killu to say a few final words to close us off, and then we go into the after party in the virtual pub. Killu.
Thank you, Graham. Thank you, everyone. I have no final words. I'm definitely staying in the pub, and I only raised my hand to say that Gareth actually put us on the spot and said, "What are you specifically doing in our breakout group?" And I noticed after that nobody in our breakout group spoke up, even though we had great conversations. I think we are all types that usually speak up, so we didn't feel called as, the ones that don't. But whoever can stay, the pub is half the fun. I'm staying. And thank you, Graham. Thank you, everyone.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Killu. And Gareth, yes, I think that is a superb question. It really does come down to us. If it is to be, it's up to me, is one of the mantras that has been very deep in me ever since before I left P&G, now 13 odd years ago, and said, right, everything I have is going to go into doing whatever I can. So the pub is now open. Thank you very much, everybody who has been with us so far. The recording will keep running, and it's now a free-for-all pub conversation. Cheers, everybody who's leaving, and the floor's yours, whoever wants to speak.
Thank you, Graham, and thank you, Killu, for the amazing conversations. This is the kind of gatherings that that resonates with me, and this is what I enjoy. And so thank you for helping me see things in a new level. Thank you.
Only a pleasure. I'm thrilled that you were able to join us, Lisa.
I usually talk too much, so I'm trying not to, but if no one says anything, I'm going to ask Martin a little bit more about the rebel evolutionary, or rebel evolution, or evolutionary rebel, however that was. When is that out? I want to hear more about it. And you're on mute. I don't lip read very well. I'm still working on it, even after a year and a half in Zoom.
Sorry, yeah, I'm still getting, yeah, rebel without a clue probably most of the time, but I think that helps me in some respects, in the fact that yeah, the rebel evolutionary idea is that after that Paulo Freire thing about do we need a revolution, we had Brexit over here. I think you've had Donald Trump over your side, if you like, whether you like the idea of Brexit, whether you like the idea of Donald Trump running the show. It's a revolutionary act, isn't it? It's people who have been left behind who then go, right, okay, and someone very well using evolutionary psychology, the bubble effect, who can talk a good thing using influencing communication, is able to get these people to revolt and just to smash things up. And you had it over there, we had it with Brexit over here. I'm not saying they didn't have a point. That's the thing. And I think that's the problem, is that this Paulo Freire idea about the persecuted overcome the persecutors, or are manipulated to overcome the status quo, so that the people that guided them to do that then become the new persecutors. I think the idea is that, yeah, we do need some rebellion, we need something, but it needs to be an evolution. Now, if you follow the universal life cycle, whether it's communication, team building, it all follows 4 stages. We're independent people, we then go to the codependent, and it's based on our own personal development. Two independent individuals come together, create a child, that child is codependent on the parent. You can also call that the entrepreneurs starting a business. And then it goes to counter-dependent because they use processes or they use social norming. And then it goes to, and it doesn't really go past that because of evolutionary psychology and hierarchy, which means that there's, as soon as someone gets, it's usually a man, because they always mess it up, don't they? But, sorry lads. But as soon as a man gets some sort of power, but females as well, I've seen it myself in the Middle East, it kicks in the encapsulated primitive side of us, which is the dominance behavior system. And so then it's all about maintaining power. It becomes more important to maintain power than doing anything else. So our universal life cycle, which then goes from counter-dependent, which is all about processes and social norming, is it's like Joseph Campbell calls it, refusal or the return on the hero's journey. They don't come back and pass the power down, or the Jason and the Argonauts gave the fleece to the community. Well, that isn't happening. Because what's happening is, as soon as someone gets too much hierarchy in a hierarchy, then it's about, oh, I've got my hands on the banners, I've got to bloody keep them. The ego's only scared of two things: not getting what it wants, which drives the entrepreneur, and when it's got it, losing it. And the entrepreneur knows that he can't keep hold of it, so they introduce more management, more processes. And so what happens? So the problem we've got is the people who've got all the money, the paradigm winners, they've got their hands in the jar and aren't going to let go of the bananas. And so we haven't really got a problem. As you know, quite often people say we've got a distribution problem, haven't we? That's the challenge. And it's all based on psychology. So I love your model, by the way. The interpersonal, inner world is absolutely true, because the inner world is a merciless reflection of the outer world and vice versa. The outer world is a reflection of your inner world. So it does start there, and you have got to attack all the different things. But in everything that I've heard so far, I'm wondering whether, is it innovation we need or creativity? You know, at some point we have to break things up. We keep talking in terms. It's funny because I've got a project with a fire rescue service in a particular area. And I'm wondering whether, even the language is based on slavery, isn't it? Accountants, accountancy sort of thing. Depreciation was invented with the idea of slaves, how much work slaves can do. And do we have to get away from the organization? Because that's the kind of language that people use when they the Germans were great at it. The Nazis, not the Germans, the Nazis were great at it by making people units, the Jews units, when they burnt them and stuff like that, they gassed them. So, this whole idea of are we too scared to let go of this idea? Do you know what? We need to get rid of organizations. We need to think about groups of communities. Do we need to transform our organizations? Well, that's just innovation, staying within the same boundaries. What we need is creativity. How do we push? The solution has been hiding in plain sight for centuries. Whenever organizations have to get stuff done, be it the military, because of the World War II, they invented special forces, SOE, all these autonomous units who had agency, autonomy, mutual accountability, and alignment towards a mission power for the better good. And agile. We're trying to incorporate agile into it, aren't we? Because it works. Because it's what's agile? Well, it's doing what indigenous communities do when they go out hunter-gathering.
I think being aware of our own limitation may be the first step. I mean, for us over 50, we say we want to change. We have, beautiful words, but as you mentioned, the language carries meaning. So we have to change the words. When I see the younger generation, I have 3 daughters, 16, 21, 22, they're going to be changing maybe more than I can change. because in these unconscious biases and this resistance to change, we have the hand in the cookie jar, as you said, and even though some of us said, oh no, I don't, we still have, if we own stuff, if we, so being aware of our own limitation.
Fortunately, I'm not encumbered too much with ownership. We rent our house and I'm like 58. I'm not going to ever own my own property. So I come at it. I've been, like I say, homeless 4 times and had to wrestle for every bit of knowledge, but I certainly get the point. Even this little bit, I'm scared of losing all the time.
Yeah. Graham, I'm curious to know, can you share a little bit more about this incubator that you're working on? Or is it a fund? What is it exactly?
It's yes and yes, I'll gladly share a bit more about it. Let me open up a slide and that will maybe clarify things a bit more. So so this is very much what it looks like. It's a factory to make connected ecosystems. And so we, unlike most accelerators, startup programs, which are looking for the unicorns or the rare founders, we're about building the ecosystems, all of the companies that form a connected ecosystem from day one. So it's more about bringing individuals in, although we do also take existing teams or existing startups with their own idea. The central part of it is a 3-month-long program which trains people in our methodology and puts them through a whole sequence of design thinking sprints and all of the normal accelerator startup stuff, followed then by an accelerator program, which has all of the standard accelerator stuff, along with an even deeper support program in our methodology. And from there, people, the companies that graduate from that enter our connected ecosystem. For people coming in, we also have this transition bridge, which is to support people who are making a transition from, say, being a full-time mother coming back into the world of work, or being a full-time member of a multinational, whatever that might be, to support individuals in making this transition. And then one of the big things about this connected ecosystem, the thing that leads to this kind of behavior rather than this kind of behavior, is that in the ecosystem, it's built across all 5 of these strata. It's a combination of how we interact with each other and ourselves, our adaptive way, fluid organization design, along with our fair shares commons, multi-stakeholder, multi-capital incorporation, and an entire supporting platform that enables all of the companies in the ecosystem to interact with each other in the most effective way for the ecosystem as a whole, which includes a whole basket of complementary currencies, as well as a bunch of other stuff. Now, we have, let's say, the first MVP of all of these elements, and we're busy raising investment to build the next versions of these. And for this to really walk the talk, the central idea is that across the whole thing will be a holding company or a special purpose acquisition company. And within that is the entire ecosystem of businesses. The SPAC invests in those books, the SPAC invests in those businesses, and the SPAC runs the startup university, the startup factory, as well as providing the capital. So that gives you perhaps a bit of a quick idea of how the factory is structured, how it works, and the relationship between the money, the university, the accelerator, and the final connected ecosystem. And the bit that's, I think, the really important take-home message, the real innovation here is it's centered on maximizing the relationships, the connections, rather than trying to maximize each individual entity in isolation from all of the others that it's connected with, regardless of whether you're looking at stratum 1 or stratum 5 or anything in between. The focus is really very much on the relationships, the connections, the value flow between, and maximizing the capacity of the channels for value flow to carry the maximum value.
This is a huge enterprise. I mean, I don't know what your plan is to, you talked about having an MVP, but this is huge. You're going to, I mean, how long is that going to take you to do that? 10 years?
Well, I've been on this journey for 10 years now.
Already?
And
but you didn't have the idea at the time, did you? How long have you been starting to work on that incubator / co-working space community?
I would say I started on this journey probably at least 15 years ago, when I was still a manager in Procter & Gamble. And in some senses, I started on this journey 40 years ago, and I'm now in my mid-50s. When I was a student in South Africa studying physics and experiencing apartheid and all of that, that laid many of the foundations for this. But it was when I left P&G 13 years ago and started asking myself the question of, we've tried so many things to make the world work, and each time we keep getting pulled back to the old system. Triple bottom line. John Elkington issued a recall for triple bottom line because it wasn't working. Conscious capitalism has fallen short of what John Mackey originally imagined. Fair trade, so many things have at best slowed us down. Nothing has turned the ship around away from the climate catastrophe. And so I started saying to myself, there must be some anchor holding us stable in our dysfunctional system. What are those anchors? And over time, so 12 years ago, I came across sociocracy, holacracy, and thought, right, we can fix it there. And then I realized that kept blowing up in my face. And I realized it was blowing up in my face because the human beings involved were not mature enough to be part of this new way of working. And so I realized we have to integrate things like holacracy or sociocracy with developmental interactions between people and within each of us. And I built a system 8 years ago, that does that. And as I was trying to bring investment in, I realized, oh, there's a huge power hierarchy that comes in from the way that we structure companies and the power that money gets over all of the other kinds of capitals. And if there's this power hierarchy background here, it's like a gravitational field distorting everything you do in these 3 strata. And then I realized, well, it's also distorting everything up here. You cannot build a viable circular economy if you incorporate with a limited company, because you just don't have the long-term trust. At best, you have trust between people. You don't even have psychological safety in a robust, anti-fragile way in organizations if it's a standard limited company, because a key investor could decide like that to pull out the board and replace it with another one, and they rip out everything you've done with holacracy, everything you're doing with human practices, consciousness raising, etc. So it's been 10 years to now.
Yeah, what's interesting is that I'm almost thinking that what you have built is more a framework than a private company, a little bit like The Donut Economy from Kate Raworth. Yeah. She's not trying to implement it in her organization. She's actually teaching cities and public government agencies and private company to think about her framework. And I think that what you have is interesting, but I'm just looking at it from a private company. And interestingly, I'm launching a company that has a lot of similarity with what you're trying to do, not at this scale. I may send you my pitch deck. I just put together an executive team. It's much smaller. It fixes a number of challenges for entrepreneurs and small business owners. But I do agree with you on some of the values that you're presenting through the process. So I may send you the pitch deck and then see. We're also raising money. I have put together an executive team. We have an MVP, and we're going to be to raise money, getting some clients first. Although we had a beta client, and it's a piece of technology combined with a community, combined with an advisor, a fractional advisor. So it's a new way of starting a company. It's not an incubator. We don't raise for money, but the piece of technology is it's like a CRM, and it helps. It's a piece of technology that helps you save your contact, build a funnel, but it has a very big marketing mindset. Because I work for a marketing agency or a co-op. So we've test drived a few distributed leadership, not sociocracy, as you mentioned, but more cooperative. So anyway, great. That's interesting. Well, that's awesome. So I'll reach out to you. I know we're connected on Twitter, but I'll reach out to you by email, and we'll see if there's something to be done together or not. And,
Excellent. Let's do that. And yes, you're right. What we're bringing is very much, it's a framework, it's a set of building blocks, it's a paradigm. And what we really hope is that lots of companies will take this on and do something with it, rather than that we own it and protect it.
right.
And the two big reasons why we're building an investment vehicle and our startup factory. The startup factory in part is to train everybody else that will do it in their own companies. So there's a huge role there. We want to be doing at most 10%, 5% of the companies that work this way. And the other reason to set up the vehicle is that this is disruptive innovation across all 6 strata. And we're probably the best people around to show how it works with a real live functioning example of a new system that people can then look at and copy. And so my thinking is, if we don't actually start up the first system and bring in the investment money needed to start up the first system, it's going to take a lot longer to get people for it to really scale.
Right.
Graham, may I
Yeah.
say something? You brought up a couple of things. One, you said there's an anchor that seems to have been kind of holding it all down, keeping it from being what it is designed to do. And it just seems to me over the years, what I've noticed is that money seems to be the critical, whether we have the capital to invest or not, seems to be the critical question in every case. And what if we reimagine what money is? And we come from a concept, from an internal concept of that the value is here, that we are the value, human beings.
Yeah.
And that in a way, find a way to restructure the way that we issue that money towards value. But let's take the word money out of the equation and use energy and determine what energy is it that we really need. Do we really need electricity? Do we really need water? What do we really need of the 4 elements? And of course, we all would like to have food, shelter, and clothing while we're working and creating something new, creating something worthwhile having. And yet, when you look back at the ancient societies, you see that none of them were using paper money. None of them were using currency that was backed by nothing other than trust. But in reality, they were using cacao beans or seeds or feathers or
Bartering.
shells. Exactly. And it was because it was based on trust, you see.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's the key issue, I feel, is that we really have to reestablish trust in the hearts and the minds and the spirits of all of us human beings again. That when we say we're going to do something, that we have integrity there, that we're going to do it. In addition, how we see money, how we all think about it is, again, based on scarcity rather than abundance. And if we can change that, for example, one day we announced that everyone in the world, everyone on our planet is a multimillionaire now. We've reissued the currency and established it so that everybody's sharing in what we create in the future. Now, is it based on crypto? Is it based on dollars? Is it based on pounds? Or is it based on euros? What is it? It is all based on, again, our own personal value. And once we start to rethink that, I have a sense that human beings are so creative that we will establish something that works well for all of us.
Right. Money is not a trust issue, it's a control issue. The reason why we have money, it's a control issue. So unless we fix the control issue, we'll have money. And money now is completely disconnected to trust. Fiat money is created out of thin air. And who creates that money? Banks, because that's their accounting methodology. It's really the game that, you know, it's fascinating. But what you're talking about is this digital currency that could be connected to reputation.
Yes.
And there are new technology like holochain. Holochain is a sort of blockchain that is being built by people who believe that the power should be back to the people.
Great. That's a fantastic concept.
And there's plenty of small,
idea.
there's plenty of small communities that are popping out throughout the world that are either coming along from the regenerative culture or even regenerative practices. So they're eco-villages, and they're trying to redefine what kind of relationship do we want to have? Because if you think about it, people that you trust, you don't pay them. We usually don't give money to our families and friends because we trust each other.
Yes.
So, yeah. Now, I mean, if you go into the money discussion, now you're, you know, you want to. I mean, there's a whole scaffolding that society is based on, and you have to be very careful. Which one do you want to unplug and deconstruct? Because as you pull one thing, the entire scaffolding is gonna, you know, come to a destruction. And the money one is a very big scaffolding, I'm afraid.
And that's the other thing, it's fear.
Yeah.
I just want to say fear.
Yeah, fear, yeah. And to summarize, Virginie, when you said, okay, my children, they are willing to change faster. I have a funny story because I'm kind of struggling with trying to change the way we're doing business, okay, since maybe 3 years, and now we have a young engineer that joined the company, and he's a physicist and an engineer at the same time, and then we went for a walk, about 3-hour walk, and I was just explaining, oh, that's what I'm dreaming about, and then he was listening, and at the end of that walk, we just sat down, watched the lake. And he said, Patrick, he said, I feel like I'm your father. And then I said, why? He said, well, you know, I'm listening to you, and, you know, everything you said during the last 3-4 hours, I'm not shocked. Okay. We're ready. We're just waiting for you guys. We are ready. And then I realized that this generation is ready. It's us that did not change that did not shift that paradigm.
Yeah, we don't understand what they're saying.
And that specific day about 2 months ago, I said, okay, now it's all about changing our own perception, changing our own paradigm, because those young fellows are ready. And that anchor is not there anymore for them. Okay, they thrive for something else that is different than what we did over the last 20, 50 years. Yeah. So it was just like a comment to summarize to make a link between those two topics. Yeah.
And they are changing already. You know, if you look at not the Me Too movement, but the gender pronoun, she, he, etc., that is a fundamental shift. We don't realize it. And in this group, you don't ask people to put their pronoun, but when you go to a gathering with a younger individual, they'll have it. And if you don't understand what it means, and you haven't thought about it, it's really mind-blowing. It pushes you outside of this understanding that because I have a female body, I'm a woman, and I'm in that box, and you're a man, and you're in that box, and you're being, expected a certain behavior. It's absolutely phenomenal. One of my daughter just texted me yesterday, I need to switch bank. That's her text. I need to switch banks. JP Morgan Chase is the number one funder of fossil fuel. I don't want to be their customers. 2 days ago.
Yeah.
So, and so it makes you think that if you start anything, if you work in any type of organization, you should have 20-year-old with you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Not just minority. But you have to hire people that have 25, So
maybe to answer the question, you said, Virginie, about how much time it will take, okay? If our generation let go, okay, it will be fast. If we still get stuck, it will be long, because then we need to to disappear before they will get there. But it's what your daughter said. I hear that with my the young engineers working with me right now. They are thinking the same way. So at one point there will be a big shift, and maybe it will be hard for us to wake up. Okay, if we don't do that shift before. Yeah. So anyway, yeah.
So speaking of the letting go, an organization I'm involved with just sent us. So I'm on the board, and sent all the board members a book, and it's written about letting go in business and the power of that. And I actually haven't fully read it, but it's right around that. I don't have it handy right here. It's over, but I'll forward it to Graham. Maybe he can send it to us as a group. But that entire concept of letting go is so powerful. And there's also on the social scene, there's Mauricio Lynn Miller, who was way ahead of his time. He's now recognized, but it took him a long time. And he basically started giving money with no strings attached, relatively small amounts, $500 up to $2,000 per, to kind of inner city Oakland and struggling communities, but just giving money to the already existing initiative. And whether it was somebody's taco truck or barter economy of babysitting and mutual barter of this way and that. And he uncovered an incredibly powerful way for kind of using the existing initiative and building it with not a lot of capital that works better than the foundations. But he had struggled for years to have the message heard, because, foundations need to portray the communities they serve as in need of their help. And that sort of creates the entire dynamic. And then it's also a bunch of, equivalents of middle-aged people, even if they're not middle-aged, but the equivalent of people who know better, who are sort of paternalistic, well-meaning, come into the community and provide solutions and then leave the community. And so that dynamic doesn't work as well as supporting the initiatives that are there and letting go and trusting that a lot can happen that way. And the key thing was that they, people didn't think it would work, because they said, well, they're just going to go buy TVs and booze and whatnot. And that's not what happened. And so he has really interesting economic data, because the only thing they asked for was just information. They wanted people to report back every once in a while. And so they built this database. And now he's doing that in Liberia. Like he has, the organization is called Family Independence Initiative. It still goes on. And he's now recognized by, you know, MacArthur and the Ashoka Fellow and all of that. But it took him many years because it was inconvenient and kind of rebellious how he did that, even though he, you know, got awards from Clinton for being the good guy in Oakland. And that's where he started thinking about what we're doing and I'm getting awards for isn't working. And that disconnect, and then talking to the governor said, well, what works and why doesn't this work? Got him creating this. But this whole notion of letting go and also finding a way to support the initiatives that are sort of naturally bubbling up and existing, whether it's in the context of, you know, socially struggling communities or anywhere else, I think there's real power there. Or in the context of age. I'll send the link to Graham, maybe you can.
I will do that. Great. Any other thoughts that anybody would like to bring in? Or are we moving towards a good point for us all to check out?
Thank you very
So,
much, Graham.
Thank you very much.
On my side,
Thank you all.
enormously appreciative of
Pleasure meeting all
Killu,
of
you leading the discussion this evening. Are we still connected?
Thanks, Killu.
Thank you so much,
We are.
Killu. It
Your
was
image
wonderful
froze,
presentation.
but we're here.
You're frozen.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Thanks.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.